A shootout in the Canadian Parliament, soldiers killed in Ottawa and Quebec. Twice in 3 days, recent converts to radical Islam have been killed, carrying out attacks that come as a shock to a peaceful nation that to its south boasts the world's longest unguarded border. Canada in shock? Some argue it shouldn't be. The country's been part of the coalition in Afghanistan for 13 years and recently voted to join the fight in Iraq. Were this week's attacks avoidable? Will more follow in places like France and Germany, which, like Canada, have this time joined the anti-ISIS coalition after sitting out the 2003 U.S.-led invasion of Iraq? Finally, with the suspects now dead, we can only speculate on the exact motives. But should they be viewed as misguided psychotic cases or full-fledged enemy insurgents? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at the jihadists of Canada. And with us, Canadian journalist Keith Spicer, author of Sitting on Bayonets, America's Endless War on Terror and the Paths to Peace.
Evening.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Let's welcome back as well Christopher Dickey, foreign editor at the Daily Beast. Joining us from London, Haras Rafiq of the Quilliam Foundation. Tell us what the Quilliam Foundation is.
Basically, the Quilliam Foundation is an organisation that focuses on countering extremism and terrorism as a result of that as well, both from a perspective of research and analysis, but also from a real practical perspective as well. And that involves going out to people and actually taking on debates and actually de-radicalising youngsters who may have gone down this path. But yeah, in essence, we are a think tank that focuses on countering extremism and tackling terrorism as well.
All right, we're going to be asking you about those recipes for countering extremism in a moment. Also joining us, Daoud Kerala, who teaches law at Georgetown University. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate. The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and on Twitter, our hashtag F24debate. Keith Spicer, let me begin with you. Ottawa under lockdown. How unlikely is that?
It's a little strange for us who have lived there for some time. Ottawa is a family-oriented town of just under 1 million civil servants, politicians, journalists, and high-tech engineers and professors. Most Canadians would tell you it's a rather boring town. That's the knock. It's because they have to pay taxes to Ottawa. I think that's part of it. But people who live in Ottawa would tell you it's secretly very exciting.
Secretly, well, it wasn't so secretly exciting. Unfortunately, it was a little too exciting.
Yes, exactly. I was going to say that.
On Wednesday, what were your thoughts when you saw the images in the Parliament?
Obviously, shocked but not surprised. I think we have all been expecting something like that. It's clear the handwriting has been on the wall for a very long time. I don't think anybody that I know, including just ordinary Canadians, has thought that we had some kind of protection until the end of time. We have known terrorism in Canada. We had in 1985 the bombing of an Air India flight killed 385 people. We've had several other bomb plots that have been stopped by the Secret Service. And we had a threat last year, I believe it was, or 2 years ago, that some jihadists were going to decapitate the Prime Minister. So we're used to this. And in fact, we're used to violence. We have...
That's not your reputation, though.
I know it is. Well, a lot of people say, look, you're the only capital that has a statue for peacekeepers. That's true. And that comes out of Prime Minister Lester Pearson's Nobel Peace Prize of 1956. But behind that, we have 166,000 Canadian soldiers buried in Europe, most of whom were volunteers who fought in both world wars, 3 years ahead of... I hate to say the United States, but it was 3 years in both cases. We got in the war, and the first time we were a colonial country, but the second time we decided freely. So we're used to violence. We were into Korea very quickly.
We're gonna pick up on that point of Canada's engagement abroad, especially in the current context in Iraq. Just to say, though, after Monday's hit-and-run attack targeting soldiers in Quebec, another recent convert to Islam, this time one with a criminal record, sparking that lockdown of the Canadian capital. Caroline Clifford has the story.
A 32-year-old raised in Quebec who recently converted to Islam, Michael Zahef Bibo was no stranger to Canadian authorities. Local media say the federal government considered Bibo as a high-risk traveller and had confiscated his passport to stop him from joining jihadists abroad. Authorities believe he acted alone, although haven't ruled out potential accomplices. The suspected gunman shot a young soldier dead at an Ottawa war memorial before storming into the Canadian Parliament, where he himself was shot dead. Local media reports cited an extensive criminal record, including robbery and drug charges. They said Bibo underwent a psychiatric assessment in 2011 and was found fit to stand trial then. Canadian media said his father was of Libyan origin and ran a cafe in Montreal, while his mother worked at Canada's Immigration and Refugee Board. His father is believed to have fought in the 2011 uprising against Gaddafi. Canadian daily The Globe and Mail quoted Bibo's friend named Dave Bathurst saying the suspected gunman had also spent time in Libya before returning to work as a miner and labourer in Canada. He said he last saw Bibo 6 weeks ago at a mosque when he said he wanted to go back to Libya to study, insisting this was only to learn Arabic and study Islam. Bathurst said his friend had at times behaved erratically.
Christopher Dickey, the mayor of Ottawa, this Thursday, talking of perhaps, because again, this is speculation, it being a lone wolf.
Well, what does it mean to be a lone wolf? Does that mean you just have this idea out of the blue and you decide to go out and kill people? I don't think so. I think what's striking about this case and the case before is that they're basically following the playbook that was laid out for them a month ago by the propagandists of ISIS, who were saying, you should attack Canada, you should attack the United States, you should attack France, you should attack the UK and Australia. And how should you do it? With anything you've got. In fact, they specified, hit people with cars, run over soldiers, lure them aside, hit them over the head with rocks. If you've got a gun, shoot them. In fact, that's exactly what you see being done right now. Now, whether these people were in touch with ISIS, I don't know. But they didn't have to be in touch with ISIS. They just need to get the message from ISIS. And if they're already semi-deranged, as this guy probably was, then that's enough for them. They think they can turn their neurosis and their madness into martyrdom. And that's exactly what they do.
Haras Rafiq, neurosis being turned into killing, or the case of somebody who genuinely believed in a cause?
I think it's a combination of the two. I think one of the pathways that's very common is that recruiters will focus on people who have mental health issues, and they will take them down through a lens through which some of the answers to issues and crises that they may be suffering from can, they believe, be cured. And I think that ultimately there were two clear things that he believed in. One is that the only way that he could be part of a community where he was going to get some parity and some help and assistance was to work with this global Islamist caliphate project. And of course, ISIL now have declared one in an Islamic, so-called Islamic state in Iraq and Syria. But ultimately, at the end of the day, there is a theological justification of this that says that the West is at war with Islam. You have to actually take on the world view of Islam, spread this caliphate around the world. And not only does God want you to do this, but God will actually reward you for doing this. So he has a feeling of belonging to a wider bloc, which is the Islamist Salafi jihadi bloc. And he genuinely would have believed that he was fighting for a cause and that God ultimately would reward him for this. But I think that just picking up on one of the things that one of the other members of the panel said, it wasn't just a month ago. In April, there was a Canadian citizen who was fighting out in Iraq and Syria actually warned Canada and New York that they were coming for Canadians and for New Yorkers and for the US and for the West. So ultimately, at the end of the day, this has been going on for a while. This person's passport was taken away from him. He was planning to carry out some sort of fighting, some sort of Islamist jihad. And he decided that because he couldn't go away, he would do it on Canadian shores. And I think that we really need to focus in on that. Once people have been identified as being possible potential jihadis, what does Canada and the rest of the world do with them? And I think that's a serious question. We certainly have some initiatives here in the UK, but I'm just wondering what there is available in Canada.
What are the initiatives available? Haras Rafiq, just one more question on that. You mentioned there were 4 warnings by Canadian jihadists. Canadian jihadists present in Syria, present when there was the attack on the In Amenas gas plant in northern Algeria. Does that make Canada exceptional or ordinary when it comes to the West?
No. Canada, as far as they're concerned, ordinary, is part of the West. Look, and it's not just Canada and not just the West. These guys believe even other Muslims, like myself, or other people who have a different theological understanding of Islam and a different political, ideological understanding, generally are their enemy as well. And they use a concept, something called takfir, which is excommunication of other Muslims. So they believe that they're at war with everybody else, and they split the world very clearly in two camps. The lands that are according to them, the lands of Islam, and for them, ISIL controlling Iraq and Syria is the land of Islam, and everywhere else is the land of war. So Canada, the UK, Europe, France, and everywhere else is just as legitimate a target for them as anywhere else.
All right, reactions coming in to us here on France 24. One from Amin. If you send your army, air force to drop bombs on other countries, what do you expect? Daoud Herala, your thoughts on that?
Well, the approach to eliminating this danger has been deficient, both on the ideological ground and use of force ground. We didn't, or the West did not pay enough attention, I would say on the contrary. The West bears responsibility for the promotion of this political Islamic fanatic discourse prone with violence that has been encouraged in Libya, encouraged in Iraq, encouraged in Syria. You know, when we look, for example, the U.S. position, the U.S. used to take someone suspected fellow of being Al-Qaeda member, they used to take him to Al-Assad regime for interrogation. At what point in time did this regime become the enemy and those suspects became the friend that should be armed, should be trained, should facilitate their problem? Well, the U.S., the West did not do a good job, first in paying attention to the ideological foundation of ISIS and other derivatives of Al-Qaeda, and it didn't and still doesn't do an adequate job in using force. Using force should involve the whole world, and this is what the United Nations, the Security Council 2170 resolution of the Security Council calls on all countries in the world to coordinate and to do their utmost to eliminate this danger. We find the Western alliance now, excluding Russia. Russia has every interest in fighting them, excluding Iran, excluding the only regime on the ground in Syria who is fighting them. On the contrary, we are doing something now to create a moderate army after the president, the US President Obama told us that moderate opposition in Syria is fantasy. Now we are trying to make a moderate opposition to fight both. This gives the impression that we are not serious about eliminating the danger. Right, there so could be use of force is legitimate, but we should take a different approach.
And you should go, you're saying, through the United Nations Security Council. Christopher Dickey, I want to broach the first point there made by Daoud. When you wrote your book, Securing the City, about how the New York City Police Department deals with threats, at the time, were people thinking about the threat of homegrown jihadists?
Oh, yes. I mean, the whole question of what they called radicalization in the West was a huge issue. And the NYPD tried to figure out, working with academics and also working with its own experience on the ground and looking at a lot of different cases, how you identify those moments when people are moving from radical thinking toward radical action. I'm not telling you that they were hugely successful in doing that, but they thought about it a lot. By the way, they also thought about Canada a lot. I mean, if we're going to talk about Canada, one of the things you have to understand is that Canada has been the source of a lot of jihadi activity over the years. There was, in 1999, on the eve of the millennium, there was a guy who was going to blow up Los Angeles airport coming in from Canada. Subsequently, in the second 9/11 plot, there was supposed to be one that followed on 9/11. Several of the recruits were from Canada. So this is an old story. The interesting thing is that in this case, the targets were in Canada, not Canadians or people coming from Canada to the United States, or for that matter, to New York City.
One of whom had his passport confiscated.
Well, yes, and I think you have to ask him those kinds of questions, and I'd be interested in what the other panelists have to say. When you take the passport away of somebody like this, and then you don't follow them, you don't keep track of them, you don't work with them, what does that say? That says you are an enemy in your own land. You know, the Tsarnaev brothers, the older of the Tsarnaev brothers.
The ones who did the Boston Marathon.
Who did the Boston Marathon bombing. He wanted desperately to become an American citizen so he could box on the American boxing team. The FBI, partly because of Russian intelligence, said, no, we're not going to let you do that. And that was part of the radicalization process with him. It's a very complicated process, and it takes a lot of time and attention to work against individual suspects.
Keith Spicer, are those questions being asked?
I would say it's worth examining the psychology and the psychoses of these terrorists, because there are differences between terrorists who come from the Middle East, I'm thinking of the Palestinians in particular, and those who are freelancing off the label of the Islamic people and Al-Qaeda. There's a professor at George Washington University, Professor Jeffrey, who has argued that when he has psychoanalyzed the terrorists in Palestine, they have legitimate personal grievances. They were personally bombed. Their family was wiped out. The guys we're talking about now in Canada have none of that. They have borrowed grievances, inherited, and there's many reasons here. I think the immaturity of these people, their total lack of knowledge of the Quran and all of the associated religious texts that come with it, or contact with a moderate mosque, they're not into that at all. They're just fantasized by websites such as one I'm not going to name. I want to help gather more recruits. And these sites are saying, here's the glorious possibility of becoming a hero. There's a lot of Che Guevara here. Adventure.
Well, in fact, it's not an accident that the key ideological work of Ayman Zawahiri, who's now the head of Al-Qaeda, was called Knights, K-N-I-G-H-T-S, under the Prophet's banner. They see themselves in a chivalric mode. They see themselves as fighting against the Crusaders. They see themselves identifying with Saladin. That's the fantasy that they indulge in, and that's encouraged endlessly by ISIS and these other groups. The cover of the ISIS magazine, a very slick online magazine, this month, is a picture of St. Peter's Square with the black flag of ISIS flying on the obelisk in the middle of the square. And it's basically saying, we're going to win the next crusade.
They're pitting it in those terms. We're going to come back and pick up on these points with the rest of our panel. You're watching the France 24 debate.